This is our second SEO webinar in our series, so we definitely encourage you to ask any and all questions that you guys may have. We did cover the basics of SEO 101 in our previous introductory webinar, so if you did not have a chance to view that material, we can definitely provide a link to that as well. This will be recorded, so don't feel pressured to write down every little thing that you see on these slides, as we'll be releasing this material to you guys in a follow-up email. And as always, just a little bit of quick housekeeping. You should have a panel on your right-hand side to give you access to some of the webinar tools. So to ask your questions, to answer the poll questions, to download the handout that Natalie was able to provide for us as well. So who are you listening to? My name is Michael Hahn. I'm an SEO specialist here with Newfold Digital. I'm joined here today by Natalie Brownell, a marketing manager here on the team as well. And we're really just excited to present this information to you. Again, today's webinar subject is technical SEO. So we'll be breaking down, in the beginning, what is technical SEO? How does technical SEO work? And really, why is it important to not only us, to our website, to our organization? And then I'll be doing a very basic walkthrough of what you guys may be coming across in a typical SEO technical audit. So just before we start off with the material, just a quick poll so we can gauge the level of expertise in the room. The question is, how familiar are you with technical SEO? No wrong answers here. We just want to gauge the familiarity you guys have. Okay, I think we can close the poll there. So it looks like the level of expertise is definitely, introductory material here, which is definitely great. This webinar was really designed to help us kind of come across this information. So again, what is technical SEO? So technical SEO, it does cover one of the most important pillars of organic search. It really is the ability for search engines to properly crawl, render, and index your pages. Obviously, that's a very extensive field. There are a lot of different ways or different components that make up the technical SEO umbrella. And that's why it's really critical that when we're managing our SEO, that we're doing a regular maintenance of our website. So typically, I recommend 2 times a year for the smaller sites at the very least, and more about once a quarter for the larger sites, and sometimes even twice a quarter for the larger or for the largest of e-commerce sites. So again, technical SEO deals with all the under the hood elements of a website. It's really too much to cover in one webinar, but some of the more important items or things you will run across your websites is going to be your cybersecurity and SSL, dealing with duplicated content, optimizing your images to make sure that they're all in proper alignment, size, that they're formatted correctly. We're really going to be tackling site load times, especially as Core Web Vitals becomes a larger part of the algorithm. For those of you who are keeping up to date with the algorithm updates, Google did begin their launch of Core Web Vitals and page experience signals yesterday. They'll be continuing to roll that out all the way through August, I believe. Another big thing here for technical SEO is going to be mobile friendliness. Google did transition to mobile first indexing in about mid of 2018, which basically means that Google is going to be going through your website's mobile version before the desktop version. They're going to be a lot more critical of mobile performance. HTTPS statuses like redirects, are they firing correctly on a 200? Are they 404ing? Are there server errors? These definitely make up a component of technical SEO. Structured data and enriched snippets are definitely a growing element of technical SEO as well, especially as we're all trying to figure out new ways of obtaining better SERP real estate. Information architecture, or basically how your site is structured, deals with how easy it is really for a spider or for users to go through your website, And can they access your priority important pages? Are there any pages that are orphaned off, meaning there's no links going to or from them? In a more practical sense, it basically means how many clicks does it take to reach the important vital elements on your website. If it's going to be difficult for a spider, it's definitely going to be difficult for your users. And we definitely want to be optimizing that path as much as possible. Now, why is technical SEO so important? We always say content is king, but at the same time, we want to be making sure that search engines and their spiders and their robots are able to even access our website and making sure that they can reach all the content and the pages properly. A solid foundation in technical SEO makes your site more appealing to not only search engines, but also to your users. And when we make it easy for them, we really incentivize both of them to not only visit us more often, but to go through more pages and hopefully for our users, get on that conversion path into the buying funnel so we can make more transactions, more conversions. And how does technical SEO exactly work? Again, a lot of material to cover in technical SEO, but what I want to cover here are some of the basics, some of the topics that I think are going to be pertinent for us, or at the very least, get us thinking about SEO more from the get-go. So to start us off is going to be information architecture or site structure. Again, basically how our websites and our pages are kind of organized. Generally speaking, wide and shallow architectures really do help spiders reach all of our priority pages easier and quicker than thin and deep structures. As you can really see in the first photo, if this was an e-commerce website, a spider would have no trouble accessing our homepage, and then from then on, the next level will be our category pages and then our product pages. Nothing is really missed by the spider. Users have a very clear defined path to navigate through. And if we have breadcrumbs on our pages, that only makes it even easier for spiders and for our users to get to where they really need to be going. As opposed to that, on our bottom structure, as you can tell, there's no real organization. It's difficult for users or spiders to really understand where they really need to go or where they can find, the relative or pertinent information. And what's worse is that we see an orphan page on the bottom right, that page that has no connecting lines. That basically means that orphan pages have no links going to or from them. It's really impossible for a spider or for a user to even find these pages. And if this was a page that's vital for your conversion path, for your buying funnel, we're leaving a lot of conversions on the table in this sense. Orphan pages have their SEO value severely truncated, and in most cases, they're not really indexable. The next subject is XML sitemaps. There used to be, pages on some corporate websites or some websites in general where there's like a sitemap and it basically provides a link to all like the category and product pages on your map. The XML sitemap is a little bit different. It's more of a behind the scenes answer sheet that we're giving to search engines. I really like the phrase cheat sheet or answer sheet because that's basically what it is. We're bundling up all the URLs that we would want to have indexed in one form, and we're just submitting them to every search engine. Every URL in this list must be valid and working, meaning no redirects, no canonicals, no 404s or anything like that. It's just an easy way for spiders to reference where they need to reach and which pages they should be seeing. Sitemaps can be differentiated between dynamic or static. Dynamic just means that they're automatic. So whenever you're updating a page or adding a page into your website, the sitemap would automatically kind of update with that URL, as opposed to static, which gives us more control due to the fact that it's all manual. Generally speaking, dynamic tends to be easier to work with, especially for the smaller sites where we have Yoast as a plugin, which usually has a dynamic XML form. And just as a quick tip here, we should be submitting, once our sitemap is on our website, we should be submitting the sitemap to Google via the Google Search Console sitemap setting. So there's a little section within Google Search Console where underneath sitemap, you just type in the URL for your sitemap, usually just yourdomain.com/sitemap.xml. And that's a great way for Google to just kind of see where your sitemap is located and easily access it. Robots.txt and sitemaps really do go hand in hand. Your robots.txt file is located right in your root, and it's a great way to give specific instructions to search engine bots when they enter our website. It's a great way for us to just provide these instructions on how they should really be interacting with certain pages. And in layman's terms, we're basically just telling search engines where they can and cannot go. And we should be linking our sitemap XML file from our robots.txt file as well. The robots.txt is one of the first places a search engine robot or spider will be accessing on our website. So they'll see these rules, and at the very bottom, they'll see a rule for our sitemap. As you can see in my example on the bottom, just listing out sitemap : and then where our sitemap is located. When we're using a robots.txt, the user agent is really just defining the specific crawler that we want to be laying instructions for, and then we differentiate between allow and disallow for the specific types of folders or paths that we want crawlers to avoid or go to. A quick little note here, the wildcard symbols, there's only two of them, the asterisk, which designates 0 or more instances of any valid character, or the $, which designates the end of a URL. So in my example on the right, when we say user agent : asterisk, that means we are saying these are instructions for every spider, every robot that comes to our site, as opposed to saying user agent : let's say Googlebot. So we're only laying instructions for Googlebot in that sense. And we're saying disallow for, in this example, our private folder, we're disallowing our image folder, and then in our middle line right there, only block this. The reason why we have a $, appended there is meaning we're not going to be disallowing anything that just contains only block this. We're going to be disallowing only URLs that end in only block this. And as for use cases, Robots.txt is a great way for us to hide duplicate content. So if we're storing a lot of our duplicated content in a specific subfolder, that's a great way for us to just kind of hide that material. If we have private material or private folders, again, that's a great way to keep them out of the search index. It's a great way for us to just specify the location of our actual sitemap XML file. And a term that I'm going to be using throughout this presentation is crawl budget. When I say Google is sending spiders to these websites, they're not going to be sending, spiders every day to a website where there's, 100,000 pages and none of them are really updated and they're really hard to navigate to. By making our websites more optimized, making sure that the site structure and architecture is optimized and the path is fluid. As I said before, we're incentivizing Google to visit us more frequently. We have what's called a crawl budget. So it's a number of times Google is going to be coming to our website per week, per month, and how many pages they're going to be going through. And we definitely don't want them wasting their time crawling our photos, crawling our PDFs or videos, where they don't really serve as much purpose. We definitely want to be keeping them on our storefront pages and our priority content pages, and making sure that these are being seen as frequently and as often as possible by Google. Differences in status code. So as I mentioned before, all your web pages have a specific status code. 200 is really what we're looking for. This just means that it's valid, it can be rendered and fetched properly, and that these are very indexable. 300 errors are a little bit different. They can range from 301, 302, 307. In most cases, we're only really dealing with 301 or 302. 301 just means a permanent redirect, and 302 just means temporary. Your 400 errors are when the pages cannot be found or they're missing. We've all seen a 404 page before. We've come across them all the time. It's just a common way to make sure that these pages are quote unquote dead. And 410 pages are exactly the same thing. It's just more of a manual method of killing these pages via Google Search Console. And your 500 errors are really specified or geared towards hosting issues. So if you're having issues with your hosting provider or your server, you'll oftentimes find a 500 error firing back at you. Now, excuse me. Now, these are some of the basics of what falls under technical SEO. And I want to cover a little bit of what you might come across in your typical SEO audit. So again, a SEO audit is similar to a stress test for your website. You're crawling your website in the exact same way or format that a search engine robot would be doing. And it's really just to uncover the inner workings of your website. You want to find which pages are even on your website, and more importantly, picking up any issues that a search engine may also potentially see and potentially penalize you for. So typically for your SEO audit, you will need some tools, and they really range from your free tools to your freemium tools, all the way up to your premium enterprise level tools. Now, for most of us in the room, the free tools are going to be more than good enough. There are free tools like Screaming Frog. I believe Ahrefs and SEMrush provide very cohesive and in-depth trial versions. And then, of course, you have your enterprise level tools like Bright Edge, Spotify, Conductor, Deepcrawl. And I want to make a little note here. The Google tools are fantastic. They do tend to be on the freemium level. For instance, like Google Analytics provides a free version and then a paid version. But oftentimes the free version is more than good enough, and especially so for Google Search Console. Anytime that we can get direct information from Google can only help us out in this field. So when we're doing our audit, we're just crawling our website in its entirety. So unless we have a very specific reason to do so, we want to be crawling every subdomain, all the subfolders, not really limiting ourselves to any kind of protocol. So when we're crawling a website, we just do yourdomain.com or .net, whatever your TLD is. And we want to be making sure that the Robots.txt file and the sitemap are being crawled in that. The site, once your crawler goes through the sitemap, it should pick up all those URLs that are in there as well. And just to really make sure that we have an accurate accounting of all the URLs, we should be comparing the number of URLs that are firing 200 status codes to the number of URLs that we're seeing valid in Search Console or Analytics. For those of us with smaller sites, we could also do, in Google search, you can just type in site : and then yourdomain.com, no www or anything like that. And that should also give you a relatively accurate number of URLs you have that are indexed by Google. So starting with orphan pages, we covered this earlier, but again, orphan pages are pages on your website that are not linked to from or to any other portion on your website. Now, the issue here is obviously that they're really difficult to navigate to. Orphan pages generally don't have any SEO value, and they're really not indexed in most cases. And anytime we see these orphan pages, they really do represent lost traffic, lost user retention, and ultimately lost revenue. Now, obviously, the quick fix here is if they are important, relevant pages to our website, there should be a link to them. And if they are especially important, we should be linking to them from our navigation or from our sub-navigation. And if they are really, not important or irrelevant or even just outdated material, we should be either redirecting these pages or 404ing them or no indexing them. To leave them as orphan just signals to Google that we have really poor organization on our website, which again affects our crawl budget. The more we have an unoptimized user structure or site structure, we're really just telling Google that we're not really worth visiting too much. Now, this is the next subject is canonical tags, which I'm sure we've come across before, especially for those of us in e-commerce. Canonical tags are just suggestions to Google or to search engines that a master copy or parent page canonical tag identifies which URL that you basically would want search engines to index for search results. You can see how it looks in the code in the middle picture there. Link rel equals canonical, hrefs into the URL. And really, this is a great way for us to limit duplication. If we have, for instance, a lot of product variations in sizes or colors, or if we have printer-friendly versions of pages, or if we have trackers on our URLs, we want to be determining, where our traffic's or users really coming from. You may have UTM parameters in your URL. We definitely don't want these non-SEO friendly URLs to be indexed. So pointing all these duplications or variants towards a master copy really just helps, avoid mixed signals and avoids duplication. And another note here, the URL that you're defining in your canonical tag should be a valid page. We definitely don't want the link in the canonical to be redirecting or to be a 404 or to have another canonical tag pointing elsewhere. We really want page A to point to page B, and page B is valid and working. We don't want page A to point to page B and have page B go somewhere else. And we want to be using these canonical tags, as I mentioned before, in lieu of 301 redirects if we want to keep these pages accessible. They do the same thing in terms of SEO equity, as in transferring the SEO equity towards whatever we're pointing. But obviously, we want people to be viewing product variation pages. We don't want people to be just redirected outside of that. And just a little quick picture diagram, if we have 4 different coats that are the exact same, but in just different color schemes, we don't want 4 versions of the same page index. We just want to be choosing one page here. For Search Console, again, another great tool that is offered by Google. If we don't have access to Search Console, I highly advise, in fact, it's quite critical that you have Search Console enabled for your website. One of the best tools within Search Console is going to be their index coverage report, and it is direct feedback back from Google on how they interacted with our website. They group all of our URLs into 4 little buckets: error, valid with warning, valid, and excluded. And just regularly going through our errors especially is going to be critical to make sure that we don't have any hiccups on our site, really. So to go in a little bit more detail, errors, again, is just as it sounds. The page was not indexed due to some type of error that the search robot kind of came across. Warnings means the page was indexed, but there is an existing error that they want you to know about. Typically speaking, this is usually an issue with your Robots.txt file. Valid pages are exactly that. The page was valid and it was indexed with no issues. And excluded means the page was not indexed, but it was probably due to our intention. So our canonical pages, our redirects, our 404 pages, or pages that Google have discovered but haven't gotten quite around to indexing them yet. And to give you an example of some of the more, I guess you might say, common issues within these little buckets, most times in your errors, you're going to find a redirect error. So if you have a redirect chain that was way too long, Google will not index any of the pages in that chain. So if you have page A going to page B to page C to page D and so on and so forth, after a certain amount of URLs, Google will no longer follow that chain and they will just de-index everything in there. Submitted URL blocked by Robots.txt. Again, this is an error when you want a specific page indexed. You've listed it in your sitemap. That's what submitted URL means. It's in your sitemap, but you're blocking some form of the URL in your Robots.txt file. There are some fantastic tools out there. Even if you just Google, Robots.txt checker, you'll be able to either manually type in or just copy and paste your existing Robots.txt file, and then you can test out whatever URL you'd like to make sure that you're conforming to your own rules. Excluded by no index tag. Again, this is probably one of the more common issues or common pages that you'll find in the excluded bucket. It just means that your page has a no index tag and cannot be indexed. It's really important that we're viewing these pages and just making sure that anything in this bucket is supposed to have a no index tag. It's actually quite frequent. For instance, if your design or your content team is creating a page, they have a no index tag on it. And when you publish it live, they forget to remove the no index tag and the page just remains no indexed. So unless you do some routine maintenance and just some checking, I guess you could say, just making sure that there aren't any pages that shouldn't have a no index tag on them. And then alternate page with proper canonical tag. As we just covered, the canonical tag will de-index the page that it's listed on, and they'll index the page that you're pointing to in lieu of it. So this just means the page was identified, Google accepted your parent canonical tag, no problem. As I had mentioned in the previous slide, these canonical tags are suggestions, not commands to Google. So that's an important differentiation. Google can, and they have oftentimes ignored canonical tags if they feel that a better one would be served. And if you don't list a canonical tag, Google will actually examine that page relative to the other pages you have on your website and actually choose one for you if it feels like it's necessary. So faulty redirects. So redirects are a common source of problems for some people in technical SEO. If we do them improperly, they can definitely affect our SEO value. So again, a redirect is going to be anytime we're forwarding a user or bot from one URL to another. They really come in 2 flavors for us, 301 or 302. As I had covered before, 301s are permanent redirects, whereas 302s are temporary. And the important differentiation here, beyond the fact that one's temporary, one's permanent, is the fact that the 301 permanent redirect will transfer most of the SEO equity rather quickly. So it's a very strong signal and intent to Google saying the page we're redirecting from no longer serves any value, and we're going to be moving users towards a more appropriate area. Whereas the 302 redirect is more of a temporary measure. So if we have a broken page that we need to fix, that's a great time to use a 302 redirect. 301 redirects we should really be doing for retired content or when pages are no longer available, or when we're doing redirects for a page map or a domain migration. And 302s, again, for broken pages, for A/B testing, multivariate testing, or just updating a page without breaking the user experience. And one small tip here, in addition to downloading a redirect tracker for your browser, which definitely helps when you're going through your website to see if you are coming across any redirect chains or improper redirects. An important note here is that we definitely don't want to be overdoing it with the redirects. And it's really important that we're only moving users and bots from one equivalent page to another equivalent page. If you have, let's say, some material that is no longer relevant or outdated, we don't want to be really redirecting these pages in mass back to our homepage, for instance. That's not a one-to-one transfer, and Google will oftentimes, if they see a redirect like that, they're going to just treat it as a 404 rather than a 301, so there's no equity being shared. So it's really important, again, and I can't stress this enough, that when we're doing 301 redirects, that we're only doing it from equivalent pages to equivalent pages. And redirect chains and loops can definitely occur, especially for our older sites when we don't have as much maintenance, for instance. So loops are going to be whenever we're going from page A to page B, back to page A, or sometimes even longer loops like back to page C and then back to page A. And chains are really just lengthy redirects. So page A to page B to C to D to E, so on and so forth. And as I noted before, once we're really past, a redirect chain of 3 redirects can definitely happen from time to time. It's not the worst thing that can happen to us. But when we get to the level of 7, 8, 9, 10 pages in a redirect chain, there's definitely going to be an issue there. We're going to be seeing a substantial increase in page load time. The SEO value will definitely be truncated. And oftentimes, Google is going to be coming in and within their error buckets of the index coverage report telling us that a redirect chain has been occurred. And really, just to give you an example of how these things can really happen, for instance, for our older sites where they were on a HTTP, so non-secure protocol in the past, switching to a secure protocol in the future, we may see an interaction like this, where it's HTTP Domain.com, where they used to redirect this to an equally non-secure www.domain.com, and then they installed the SSL security later. So now we have a third redirect going to the secured format of HTTPS www.domain.com. So that's a general example. And how to break this up is really, once we identify the chain, we want to be breaking them up and making sure that every valuable page within that chain is pointing towards the final destination. So just making sure that the first and second link in those redirects are going to the final destination. You may also come across faulty URL structure or just poor URL structure. So SEO-friendly URLs just help search engines and users understand the information architecture, the structure of our websites. Everything should be on a proper path and proper flow, as we had discussed before. And non-friendly URLs are going to be any times where we have substantially long URLs. When we're talking about 7 to 8 different subfolders and a very long chaotic URL slug afterwards. Using numbers in our URL is usually a poor experience, or using special characters in lieu of letters. So for an SEO tip, as we always know, for keeping your domain SEO friendly as well, we want to be making sure that our URL structure is short, it's very organized, and that if we are targeting a specific keyword, that we're mentioning that primary keyword somewhere in our URL structure. So for this e-commerce example below, if we have a fishing store, www.yourdomain.com/fishing, we want to be making sure that if this is a product page centered on professional fishing rod, that we're mentioning professional fishing rod in the URL. Now, lastly, core web vitals. I know this is a stressful topic for a lot of us. It's been in the works for some time now. Google just began launching their new page experience signals yesterday, and they'll continue doing it all the way through August. Core Web Vitals speaks to 3 different elements specifically. when it comes to page load time. That's going to be LCP, FID, and CLS. LCP just stands for largest contentful paint, and that is really just measuring the amount of time it takes for the largest content element on your page to load and be visible. FID is first input delay, so that's measuring the amount of time it takes for a user to kind of first interact with an element on your page. And cumulative layout shift just measures unexpected movement on page elements. We've definitely all been there in the past. We're trying to click, yes, or interact with a video, and all of a sudden the video shifts and we're clicking on an ad instead. So that will be a layout shift, and that's definitely a poor user experience. And in the future, we will be penalized if we continue to use those kind of tactics or kind of elements on our webpage. So our SEO tip here, you should be leveraging Google's tools as often as possible. As we mentioned before, a great tool for this is Google's Page Speed Insights tool. They will actually lay out some of the optimization opportunities that exist for you. For instance, oftentimes we'll see that one of the largest blockers to page load time will be total blocking time, or even loading your JavaScript scripts. So if you leverage, for instance, multivariate testing tools like Google Optimize, Optimizely, or A/B-Tasty, you should be making sure that these scripts and these tags are only on necessary pages, so we're not affecting our entire domain in a negative way. For instance, we definitely don't really need to be having elements like A/B-Tasty or Optimizely on our knowledge base pages or on our blog pages. They just really aren't going to be necessary there. So by removing them from these types of subfolders or subdomains, we're actually increasing our load time significantly. Great, I know that was a lot of material. I know that technical SEO can be a bit of an esoteric topic. Thank you for taking this journey with us. And if you have any further questions, please answer or ask them below. Okay, great. Not too many questions from the group today, but if you do have any follow-up questions about the material here, or questions on our previous webinar, SEO 101, or on our future topic, which will be centered on actionable 5 SEO tips that you can take to immediately impact the SEO on your websites, please ask them either below or reach out to us via email. Oh, I'm actually just seeing here that we do have a few questions, which unfortunately I am not able to see here. If you'll just give me one moment. Great, so one of the questions here is, why would you ever redirect a page instead of just deleting the page? So if our page has generated any form of SEO value, it's important that we don't just lose that built up traction that we've had or that built up value. We definitely want to be utilizing that SEO equity in some way, shape, or form, which is why, for instance, if we're talking about a blog page or a blog article that we used to have that's built up some equity, now the information is a little bit irrelevant and we have a stronger performing post elsewhere, we should be redirecting that blog page to the newer updated material. Or if we have a storefront page that used to generate value, but we no longer offer that product, for instance, we should be redirecting that page into maybe the higher level category page. Just making sure that the redirect is a one-to-one kind of equivalency. We definitely don't want to be, for instance, redirecting a stale blog post back to the homepage. That would be a poor redirect. So as long as the material is relevant and there is SEO value to kind of justify the redirect, we should definitely be utilizing a redirect whenever possible. 404s tend to just kill the value of whatever you've built up. And also, if the page that you're killing in question is a part of or an integral part of your user flow, your conversion path, we definitely want to be redirecting users to a relatively similar page. And I apologize. I am, for some reason, unable to see these questions. No, here they are. Yes, one of the questions here is if you purchase 3 of the domains, for instance, michaelhan.ca, michaelhan.us, michaelhan.com, and we have our main site structured on the .com, we should definitely be redirecting users to our main domain. It's a great way for us to just maintain control over not only our brand name, but just the structure of the number of properties we have out there. The only time I would not do a redirect in a circumstance like this is if we have significant brand presence across all 3 properties. So if we have built up equity and value in, say, michaelhan.ca and michaelhan.us, it may be more valuable to, if we have users, subscribers, whatever it might be, that go onto these pages, a canonical tag may be more efficient so that we can, at the very least, have our users kind of interact with the older properties. And just as a note here, all of this material will be available on our webinar folder, which is located on our blog and domain.com/blog. You'll be able to find the webinar material there. Great question here. Do you have a simple document of how to do SEO for beginners? Marina, we did cover a SEO 101 topic about a month and a half ago, where we cover some of the more basics or introductory material to SEO. I think it's a fantastic first video for people who are new to SEO. And our next webinar is going to be centered on SEO tips. So we're going to be focusing on just 5 simple tips that everyone can really do, no matter the size of their organization, and do something to immediately take advantage of their SEO. Perfect. So anything different or specific in your approach for doing technical SEO for an e-commerce site? The only real difference between a blog site or a e-commerce site, you should definitely be doing a lot of the things the exact same way, making sure that we're optimizing for user experience, making sure that all the websites and the technical components are firing properly. The only real difference is on an e-commerce site, we're just so focused on profit, loss, on revenue. So that's another layer of consideration for when you're going through your pages. So making sure that a user is on the optimal flow, and that making sure that there aren't too many pages in between in a checkout process and a conversion process, making sure that all the material is really there. I think that for e-commerce sites, especially within SEO, we need to focus a little bit more on the differentiation between resource material versus storefront material. So if you type, anything into Google, you'll get a variety of different material served back to you based on whatever your query was. So for us, buy domains as a very transactional keyword or a very storefront driven keyword, where most of the landing page that you will see after typing a query like that are going to be storefront material, as opposed to say something like, what is the best domain to buy, which is definitely more top of funnel, more resource, more question type of material. So for an e-commerce site, you want to be making sure that you have a healthy mix of storefront material and then let's say blog material or knowledge-based material to kind of answer these top of funnel, non-branded questions. And how can you find someone to help you do SEO for your company? Unfortunately, that's a tricky question. I think the best way to do SEO or excuse me, to find someone to do SEO for you is going to be word of mouth. Finding an agency that has good reviews, or someone on LinkedIn that has you know, a history of being able to do something like this. You really want to be focused on making sure that they're going to be covering all your bases. I think that a proper, whoever is going to be ultimately doing your SEO, they should be able to own the results of whatever they're doing. They should have a clear strategy. All these things, unfortunately, are going to have to be your own due diligence before you hire them. I don't think any legitimate SEOer would guarantee you results or anything like that. But they should have at the very least a strategy that you can, you know, ask questions about, that they're open to. That would be my take on how to find someone to do SEO for you. Okay, great. I apologize if I have missed your question. If you would like to have it answered, again, feel free to email us. There should be a follow-up email with all the material. I'm not sure if we're going to be including, actually, we will be including the recording there as well. And again, please join us for our next webinar, which will be centered on 5 SEO tips. Any questions, of course, reach out and you'll be able to find all the bullet tip information in both the follow-up email and on our blog, domain.com/blog. Thanks again, everyone.